Jonell Joshua is an author and illustrator based in Brooklyn, New York, whose work is rooted in personal history, memory, and cultural identity. Growing up between Savannah, Georgia, and South Jersey, she draws inspiration from her family's experiences, particularly her mother's artistic influence and the resilience of her upbringing. A graduate of Pratt Institute with a BFA in Communications Design Illustration, Jonell's work has been recognized by the Society of Illustrators and the American Illustration International Motion Arts Award. Her clients include the New York Times, NPR, PBS, American Experience, Bloomberg Pursuits, and Warby Parker, among many others. In addition to illustration, she explores narrative and visual storytelling through talks and panels at events like San Diego Comic-Con and the School Library Journal's Day of Dialogue. Her debut illustrated memoir, How Do I Draw These Memories, is a deeply personal reflection on childhood, family, and survival in the face of mental illness. The book captures the complexities of love, nostalgia, and faith with tender illustrations and lyrical prose. Beyond publishing, Jonell is an active educator and workshop leader, engaging with topics such as mental health, memory, and representation in art through institutions like the NYCDOE and Pratt Libraries. Whether working in editorial, books, or public speaking, Jonell's work centers humanity, vulnerability, and the power of visual storytelling. Great, Jonell. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. And let's start with your early influences, Jonell. How did your upbringing in South Jersey and Savannah, along with your mother's artwork, shape your passion for illustration?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question to just kick off with because so much of my art is deeply rooted in my childhood experience. So, growing up, I moved between two different locations. It was living in Savannah, Georgia, with my grandparents on my father's side, and living in New Jersey with my grandparents on my mother's side. And a lot of that was actually due to, unfortunately, my father passing away when I was only 6 years old, and then my mom also struggling with mental illness. So, me, along with my brothers, we were uprooted a lot throughout our childhood. And because of that, I was little dealing with a lot of big emotions. And when I ultimately moved to New Jersey for the first time, I was actually living in my mother's childhood home. And that was actually where I saw my mom's like art portfolio for the first time. And when I saw her artwork, I was just like so blown away from like her talent, and I wanted to be just like her because I also, like, at that age, it was around the time of second grade. I had just started at a new school in New Jersey. I was actually held back in the second grade. So once again, another thing to navigate was like school, like trying to make new friends and being really quiet and to myself. So navigating all these different things, my way of trying to make friends while in school was actually drawing kids' portraits in the cafeteria during lunch. And by doing that, that would actually initiate conversation. So kids in the cafeteria would see me drawing them, and then it would be like a lineup of kids asking me to draw their portraits. So it started with a lot of, for me, like seeing my mom's art and being like really inspired by what she was doing and really driven by that because I was like, oh my gosh, I want to draw just like my mom. And then that, along with actually like drawing myself in school and trying to make connections with other kids, it kind of just continued to snowball from there. And I realized that art was really like, it was really therapy for me, and it was really just a form of self-expression and really just trying to like use it as an outlet to communicate.
Great. Uh, from those early roots, let's move into your education. What drew you to study communications design at Pratt, and how did that program influence your artistic voice?
Yeah, so that journey was really interesting for me because I'll actually rewind a little bit. In high school, by this time I was actually living in Savannah, Georgia with my paternal grandparents. And I was at that point going to Savannah Arts Academy, which was a school for visual and performing arts. And my major was visual arts. So I was like deeply immersed in like art making in like all different forms. And by that point, I knew I wanted a career in art. And then outside of school, like when I was watching like things on television, like, movies and commercials, I was paying closer attention to like what was around me when it came to creativity. And I really started thinking about like, okay, well, I love art. I love like being creative. So how do I actually turn this into a career when I was in high school? So even like motion graphics, I started paying attention to like that kind of stuff. And at home, like on the family computer, I would actually Google like on Glassdoor, like different art careers that were possible. And I would look at like the salary associated with each career, because at that point, living with my grandparents, one of the things that was kind of reiterated over and over again was, okay, if you're gonna go into this career path, make sure it's something that's quote unquote stable. So I had that little note constantly in my ear about making sure that I had a stable career path. But I wanted to do whatever was in my bandwidth to try to make like my passion an actual career. So I remember Googling and seeing like art director, and I was like, I don't know what an art director does, but they make a lot of money and it sounds cool. So then fast forward to going to Pratt, they had an advertising art direction major. It was in the School of Design, and Pratt has this umbrella. I don't know if they still have it now, but the umbrella had three different majors. So you could choose between the advertising art direction major, graphic design, or illustration. And because I saw like the big word art director, art direction, I was like, that's the one I want. I'm going for that one. And then by my sophomore year, because foundation year, which is freshman year, you're just doing all of like the traditional foundation classes. So by my sophomore year, when I actually took like the classes in my focus, I didn't like it. I got my first C. So for me, that was like a big deal. And because I didn't like it, I was like, okay, I can't do this. I can't make a career out of this. I'm gonna pivot. And I was torn between actually switching schools and going to a fine art focus. So I was thinking about doing like drawing or painting. But then because Pratt in the communications design department had that umbrella, I could easily switch either to graphic design or illustration. So ultimately, I decided, okay, I can't afford at this time to switch into the fine art program. So illustration is the closest thing that I can get to getting my hands dirty. And it was honestly like one of the best decisions I could have made because I was able to draw and illustrate. And within that, it also taught me about storytelling, which is something that's so integral to my work now. So it's not just about making an aesthetically beautiful like picture or drawing. It's really about like what is the root of this illustration truly getting at and how do I convey that message?
Hey, yeah, totally. Well, your hard work and vision have clearly paid off. Your work has been recognized by institutions like the Society of Illustrators, etc. What do those honors mean to you personally and professionally?
Yeah, that's a question that I still kind of ponder at today. Because for me, it's interesting with being immersed in art for so long and since being so young and going to like even an art high school, I started winning awards pretty early on. I was always told by my family and other folks that I was gifted and I was good at this. So it was it's interesting because I think at a young age going through that and getting recognized at an early age, like I started to associate like art and success through that avenue, which was quote unquote winning. But then, fast forward to college, I think when I started like learning all these new different methods of storytelling and art making through illustration, all of that kind of got stripped away. And it really was like starting over again. So I like had no idea like what illustration even truly meant or like how I was going to make a career out of this. But I knew I was curious and I kind of just continued to lean on the curiosity. And then, fast forward to my senior year in college, um, I actually my work was displayed in the Society of Illustrators. And then I entered into another competition. It was the American Illustration International Motion Art Awards. And all of these different like institutions and big awards I learned through like Pratt. And even in high school, the awards I entered into were because of like my high school. So the only reason I even like knew about these different opportunities was because of like teachers or professors like sharing these things with me. And I do have an appreciation for them, but I feel like I am at a stage now in my career where I'm really like doing a lot of healing on a personal level when it comes to art making and stripping away all of those things yet again, because I think that what I've been navigating and learning to like take off is that success ladder and climbing that success ladder and really getting back to the root of my why I was creating in the first place. So even though for me from a young age, high school, my work was put in the US Capitol and there were these big prestigious awards I was getting. I think because of that and experiencing that at a young age, I like continued to think like, oh, like I hit this benchmark. Now, what's the next benchmark? And then it continued to snowball into that to the point where I started putting a lot of pressure on myself. And now I'm learning that all of that pressure that I put on myself has actually like contributed to a lot of different mental health struggles for myself. And now I'm learning that I just need to make art for the sake of making art and for my own mental health. So I've really simplified a lot of like the work that I've been doing lately. And sometimes it's as simple as like drawing flowers, which is what my current fixation is on. So yeah, it's an interesting conversation thinking about awards and these prestigious institutions, especially as it relates to us as artists. But I think it really is about getting to the core of like your why and going back to that no matter what.
Yeah, no, that's very delightful that you build a space where you can navigate and make art as you sort of see it, as you envision it. Now let's talk about some of the incredible clients you've worked with in the past. You collaborated with major clients like NPR, the New York Times, and Warby Parker. How do you approach balancing your voice with the vision of these organizations?
Yeah, that's another great question. It's interesting because I think Pratt actually really helped um, navigating this process when it comes to working with different organizations and different publishers, because ultimately, like being in the communications design like major in school, even though my focus was illustration. it really was the core of it was really like learning to communicate and how to visually convey a story or a message. So for me, when it came to working with a lot of these different organizations and publications, I would have art directors, funny enough, actually come to me with a different prompt or a different story or an article, or even a publisher that would come to me with this book idea or this concept. And then, just basically like reading through the prompt or reading through the article that's going to be published. And from there, deciding for myself, well, for one, is this something for me that I want to work on? Is this something that aligns with my values? And if so, also the question that I would always bring up to myself is this something that I can learn from and the audience can learn from? And from there, if those like big things like hit, then I would move forward and accept the prompt and create an illustration to accompany whatever that like article or whatever that story is being told was, and then take it from there. And then even when it comes to my own personal practice, a lot of it is rooted in storytelling in different ways. So I think that they've kind of like had an interesting, like, symbiotic relationship where even if I'm making illustrations for other people's stories versus my own, I always like find that, when it comes to collaborating, even with larger institutions, as long as it hits my own values, I can always say yes or no, because no is always an option too. So that's really what I try to get at is remembering like what my own values are when being approached with different prompts or concepts for making illustrations.
Yeah, it sounds like you try to stay true to your style without compromising the brief. Now, let's explore some of the deeper themes in your work. I'm interested also in many of your talks and workshops focus on memory, identity, and mental health. Why are themes important in your work, in your storytelling?
Yeah, so the workshops really came about when it was after my memoir, How Do I Draw These Memories, released. And I I did a talk, and it was a professional development talk for teachers that were then going to actually teach their students how to like make their own books with illustrations for the Ezra Jack Keats bookmaking competition. And I remember like when I was sharing my process with the teachers, even just like the response from the teachers, they were just sharing with me how valuable it was for them to hear from me, to not only share my book process, but to really share like what the core of my book was about and how helpful it was for them as teachers, but also for young readers as well, since the book is like for YA audience. Um, so with the workshops, really getting to the core of, things like healing with mental health, also talking about things like unconditional love and faith and the preciousness of life. Those were all like really big, like core themes within my own storytelling and bookmaking journey as I was opening up about my childhood. So with the workshops, it's really it's really interesting because at the beginning of the process, when it came to the bookmaking part, I set an intention for myself, and that intention was, I hope that this book can actually help young people. I hope that this book, people can read my story and see themselves within it. And then from there, fast forward to today, with the book being out for a year now. I am happy that it's kind of expanded into more of a community project where I can go to schools, I can talk to teachers and parent leaders, I can go out into the community, and my book process has now kind of transformed into community work. And by simply sharing my story, it's also empowering other people to share their stories and to also craft their stories through photographs and archival material and, like collaborating with family members and having conversations that they might not have necessarily had with family or friends before.
Yeah. Speaking of storytelling, you led a powerful workshop recently. Can you share what inspired the storytelling through memory workshop you led at the NYC DOE conference, and what you hope participants took away from it?
Yeah. So with that one, that was really incredible because that was my first time pitching to the DOE. It's the Department of Education here in New York City. And I was nervous at first because it was my first time pitching, where like the first talk was kind of just like it was an opportunity to share my process. And then, of course, that sparked the idea of like, oh, well, going back to the comments that the teachers made at that first book talk, they shared how like helpful and insightful it was. So sometimes it really is a matter of like leaning in on that inkling or that little nugget that folks share with you and responding to that and really leaning in on that. So with the mind mapping through memory workshop that I did, it was really about helping teachers and parent leaders to connect the dots of their lived experience and their own stories to actually expand on that and create like larger stories. So it was like it incorporated photographs. So what I do at the workshops is I'll have like a little like portable printer and what we do is we actually like extract archival material through our digital devices because sometimes like even our phones become kind of like digital clutter. And the goal is to really like extract that archival material and print it out and really curate our own stories and have it like in a very tactile form. And it's combining like preservation, it's combining like your own stories and really honing in on that. But also talking about values because values is something that's really important, I think, to get at is, what are your personal core values? And then I implement the different themes of like healing, mental health, and different formats of storytelling, even storytelling for social change. And through those themes and values, sharing those with the participants, they're able to then focus a little bit more closely on what type of archival material they would like to extract and print out and curate their story for that. So it's a really I found that through the workshops, it's been really healing and therapeutic for folks. And I'm happy to share that folks have actually told me that it has been a therapeutic process for them as well. So for me, it's just continuing to lean on that little nugget that folks share with me so that I can continue to expand the workshops for other people.
Hey, sounds like a really true moment of reflection, digging through this archaeological personal archive. Let's expand on the topic of mental health for a second. You've spoken about mental health in various formats, from podcasts to panels. How do you use your illustrations to support conversations around healing and emotional well-being? I think you've kind of spoken about that already, but I would like to know a little more.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it really gets to the root of my lived experience. Just, going through like really big like issues through my childhood and like learning like about mental health and navigating my own mental health and no one really having the language for us when we were children. But then, as I got older and learning through life and having more conversations with folks, realizing like, oh, this is what bipolar disorder is. This is what anxiety is. This is what ADHD is, and so forth. So through all of these different things, through my own lived experience, it really was just taking what my lived experience was and navigating that. And with my own creativity, combining those things, those big question marks that I had, and what I've been like learning through with life and responding to it. And hopefully, from what I've learned and been able to respond to, share that with others, and particularly young people. So, with my book and creating the illustrations, for me, when thinking about mental health, it can go one way or the other. You can express yourself and like the deepest, darkest parts of what your experience are, which is very true and absolutely needed to really like get it out. But I think that sometimes when we're dealing with a lot of darkness, we also need to lean in on the light. And for me, because of the values that I had within my family, one of the things that we would always express to each other growing up, no matter what the circumstance was, you know, we had a great childhood. We had a childhood filled with love, with family, with laughter, with joy. And for me, it was remembering those key things, the love, the laughter, the joy, the precious memories, and the mundane. Sometimes it was simple as going outside and like playing, in the grass and rolling down the hill. So for me, when I was creating the illustrations for my memoir, it was really honing in on what hope and love and faith looked like and depicting that despite what the circumstances may have been, in addition to actually sharing the truth of what our real experience was like. So, as readers and young people would read through the story and see all the illustrations, they're really seeing the wholeness of our story. So, not just like the sad parts, but also like the love and the light. And hopefully, that they could see that and see that there's hope and there's opportunity here so that they know that when they're also navigating their own different circumstances, whether that's their own mental health or having a parent that might be going through something, ultimately, like remember to not give up hope. So that's what my goals were with creating the illustrations that depict mental health in different ways, and also the storytelling and depicting that in different dimensions.
Yeah, you touched upon this already, your memoir. Your memoir takes this to an even a more intimate level. Your memoir touches on growing up with a mother who struggled with mental illness. How did you find um, the courage to translate such personal memories into visual storytelling?
Yeah, it was difficult. It was definitely a challenge going through the process, because it's one thing when you're at the beginning and you have the idea and you say like, "Oh, I'm gonna make, a memoir and I'm going to open up about these things." And one of the first things that I did was I asked for consent from my family and I asked for consent from my mom. And then from there, I just like continued to go through the process. But one of the things that I wasn't prepared for was the amount of healing and unpacking that I would have to actually go through. So early on, it was a matter of maybe avoiding some of those big like conversations. But then if I wanted the book to truly be like about mental health and uncovering these different like topics and issues, it meant having those conversations. And for me, this book was also a collaboration. So when you read through the book, you'll see that there's different chapters in different perspectives. So you're actually reading from the perspective of my mom, and you're reading from the perspective of my brothers. So it was a matter of actually interviewing my family members and interviewing my mom, and sometimes having conversations that I had never had before, and really seeing my mom for more than just being my mom and for the wholeness of who she is.
Great. And then to close, let's talk about the book itself. How do I draw these memories? And how do I draw these memories? Themes like faith, nostalgia, and unconditional love shine through. What do you hope readers especially young ones, take away from these reflections? I think you talked about that briefly. So,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I definitely hope that readers remember, like, no matter what your experience is and what you're navigating through life, just remember to hold on to those little moments that you had that were really special. So whether it was, if you have siblings, you and your siblings playing and making jokes, as simple as it may be, like hold on to that and hold on to the joy. And, no matter what your family even may look like, remember to also lean in on your community because within my memoir, in so many different ways and layers, I express gratitude for my community members, which weren't just my immediate family. It included, of course, my grandparents, having them as our huge, huge support system, but also teachers. It was my mentor when I was a child. It was neighbors. So all of these different people helped to really raise us because, as the saying is, it takes a village to raise a child. It's so true. So with young people, I want them to know to really just like keep the joy and hold on to that. And this too shall pass. That's another saying that my grandmother would always express to me when we were little and going through different circumstances that were really difficult. She would always say, this too shall pass. So remember that as well as, try to hold on to the light and the joy and remember that the darkness is only temporary.
yeah, lovely. Thank you so much for being here, Jonell. I really appreciate it. And I guess this will be my last question. What's next for you creatively? We're running out of time, but I would love to know if you have any upcoming events or projects or dreams that you're excited about.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I just had an event yesterday. I've been expanding the workshops. So I'm currently in the process of like doing a huge overhaul of my website to really like get the workshops like up and running even more. So I'm continuing to pitch. The workshop I did yesterday was with a friend and it's like crafting wellness. So we're kind of collaborating where we're combining like wellness DIY in a world inundated by capitalism. And we're also incorporating my storytelling components and curating them for each workshop. So there's that. And then on a creative personal level, I kind of mentioned this little nugget earlier, but I've kind of been in the phase of like drawing plants, and that's what I have the capacity for at the moment. But my eye has been really catching on to nature, whether it's just like walking down the block and seeing like different brownstones and like their flowers. There's a lot of lilies currently blooming in Brooklyn. So I've been taking a lot of photos of like flowers and trying to actually create like another like multi-dimensional project where it's like bookmaking with like botany and botanicals, and also like doing like a huge painting that like kind of displays like my love for nature in different ways. So I'm kind of going into my nature era.
Yeah, lovely. Well, thank you so much, Jonell, again for being here today. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing your painting come to life.
Thank you so much.